There exists a single habit, buried deep within the psychological warfare tactics of history's most cunning minds, that can transform you from someone who gets played to someone who orchestrates the game entirely. Most people will reject this habit because it requires something they find terrifying, the complete abandonment of their need to be liked. But if you can embrace this darkness, you will never again find yourself at the mercy of someone else's agenda. You will become the one setting the agenda. What I'm about to share with you isn't about becoming a monster. It's about becoming strategically untouchable. It's about developing what I call the habit of calculated indifference, the ability to emotionally detach from outcomes and people in a way that gives you absolute power over every social situation you enter. This is the hidden weapon that separates those who control from those who are controlled. You see, most people enter every interaction with their heart on their sleeve and their desperation written across their face. They need validation, they crave acceptance, they fear rejection. And in doing so, they hand over their power to anyone willing to exploit these weaknesses. But there is another way, a way that Machiavelli understood when he observed the courts of Renaissance Italy, where survival depended not on being good, but on being smart. The habit I'm revealing today will teach you to move through social situations like a master chess player, always thinking 3 moves ahead, while your opponents are still trying to understand the rules of the game. You'll learn to read people's hidden motivations, to influence their decisions without them ever realizing it, and most importantly, to never again be caught off guard by betrayal, manipulation, or social ambush. But understand this from the beginning. Once you develop this habit, there is no going back to naive trust. Once you see how the social world really operates, you cannot unsee it. You will begin to notice the manipulation attempts that fly over other people's heads. You will recognize the power games that others mistake for genuine friendship. You will understand why certain people always seem to get what they want while others, often more deserving, are left wondering what went wrong. This is not a path for everyone. It requires you to accept some uncomfortable truths about human nature. It demands that you stop believing in the fairy tale that good intentions are enough to protect you in a world where others are playing by very different rules. If you're still holding onto the belief that being a good person guarantees good treatment from others, you might want to stop watching now. But if you're ready to learn how power really moves in social situations, then stay with me. The foundation of calculated indifference begins with a brutal realization. Every person you meet is asking themselves one question, consciously or unconsciously. What can this person do for me, or what can this person do to me? They are not wondering about your inherent worth as a human being. They are not concerned with your feelings unless those feelings somehow impact their own agenda. This might sound cynical, but it is simply realistic. Once you accept this truth, you can begin to operate from a position of clarity rather than delusion. You stop expecting people to care about your interests simply because you care about theirs. You stop being surprised when someone throws you under the bus to save themselves. You stop taking betrayal personally because you understand it was never about you. It was about what served them in that moment. This understanding creates the first layer of your calculated indifference. You begin to observe human behavior with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying lab specimens. You watch how people position themselves in conversations, how they shift their loyalties based on who holds power, how they present different versions of themselves to different audiences. And you do all of this without judgment, without anger, without the emotional reactions that cloud most people's perception. But observation alone is not enough. The truly powerful develop what I call strategic emotional distance. This means you can engage warmly with people. You can be charming and likable, but underneath that surface performance, you remain completely unattached to their opinion of you or their response to you. You become like an actor who can cry real tears on stage, but goes home emotionally unaffected by the tragedy they just performed. This detachment becomes your secret weapon because it allows you to make decisions based on logic and strategy rather than emotion and impulse. When someone tries to manipulate you through guilt, you feel the attempt, but it doesn't control your response. When someone tries to flatter you into compliance, you enjoy the compliment but see through the tactic. When someone attempts to intimidate you, you assess the real threat level without being paralyzed by fear. Most people are emotional hostages to everyone around them. Their mood depends on how others treat them. Their self-worth fluctuates based on external validation. Their decisions are influenced by their desperate need to maintain relationships, even toxic ones. But calculated indifference frees you from this prison. You become emotionally self-contained, drawing your sense of worth from your own internal compass rather than from the shifting opinions of others. This doesn't mean you become cold or cruel. In fact, you often appear warmer than most people because you're not desperately seeking anything from them. You can afford to be generous with compliments because you don't need them returned. You can listen without agenda because you're not trying to impress. You can disagree without anger because their opinion doesn't threaten your sense of self. This paradox, that caring less makes you more attractive, is one of the fundamental principles of social power. But here's where most people misunderstand this concept. They think indifference means not caring about anything or anyone. That's not strategic, that's just numbness. True calculated indifference means you care deeply about your goals, your values, and your long-term vision, but you hold everything else lightly. You can appreciate people without needing them. You can enjoy relationships without being dependent on them. You can pursue opportunities without being attached to specific outcomes. This selective caring creates an aura of mysterious confidence that others find magnetic. People are drawn to those who seem complete within themselves, who don't appear to need anything from anyone. It's the same principle that makes certain individuals naturally charismatic. They project the sense that they would be perfectly fine whether you like them or not, and paradoxically, this makes you want their approval even more. As you develop this habit, you'll notice something fascinating happening in your social interactions. People will begin treating you with more respect, even though you're not demanding it. They'll seek your opinion more frequently, even though you're not pushing your views on them. They'll work harder to gain your attention, even though you're not withholding it as a manipulation tactic. This happens because you've shifted the fundamental dynamic from needy to abundant, from reactive to proactive, from desperate to selective. The second layer of calculated indifference involves mastering what I call strategic silence. Most people feel compelled to fill every pause in conversation, to explain themselves when questioned, to defend their positions when challenged. But silence, when used correctly, is a form of power that few understand. It forces others to reveal more than they intended. It creates space for people to project their own insecurities onto you. It makes your words, when you do choose to speak, carry more weight. Strategic silence is not about being antisocial or mysterious for the sake of mystery. It's about understanding that information is power, and the person who reveals less while learning more has the advantage in any interaction. When someone asks you a probing question, you can pause, consider whether answering serves your interests, and respond accordingly. You don't owe anyone access to your thoughts, your plans, or your private life simply because they're curious. This selective sharing creates what psychologists call the scarcity principle. When something is rare or difficult to obtain, it becomes more valuable. When you're not an open book, when you don't spill your life story to anyone who will listen, when you keep certain aspects of yourself private, you become more intriguing. People begin to wonder about you, to fill in the blanks with their own imagination, often creating a more impressive version of you than reality might support. But strategic silence serves a more important purpose than just creating mystique. It protects you from giving others ammunition to use against you later. Every personal detail you share, every insecurity you reveal, every goal you announce becomes potential leverage in someone else's hands. The person who knows your fears can manipulate you through them. The person who knows your dreams can sabotage them. The person who knows your weaknesses can exploit them when it serves their purpose. This is why calculated indifference includes being very selective about who gets access to your inner world. Most people treat their personal information like free samples at a grocery store, handing it out to anyone who shows mild interest. But the strategically minded understand that intimacy is a form of currency, and like any currency, it loses value when spent carelessly. The third dimension of this habit involves developing what I call outcome independence. This means you can pursue what you want without being emotionally devastated if you don't get it. You can ask for the promotion without your self-worth crumbling if you're rejected. You can approach someone you're interested in without being destroyed if they're not interested back. You can start a business without being paralyzed by the possibility of failure. Outcome independence is perhaps the most powerful aspect of calculated indifference because it allows you to take risks that others won't take, to have conversations that others avoid, to pursue opportunities that others are too afraid to attempt. When you're not attached to specific outcomes, you can play the game more aggressively because you're not terrified of losing any particular hand. This mindset shift changes everything about how you negotiate, how you network, how you pursue relationships, how you advance your career. When you truly don't need a specific outcome, you can walk away from bad deals, toxic relationships, and exploitative situations. And ironically, this willingness to walk away often gets you better results than desperately clinging to whatever scraps others are willing to throw you. Most people negotiate from a position of need. They need the job, so they accept lower pay. They need the relationship, so they tolerate poor treatment. They need the approval, so they compromise their values. But calculated indifference allows you to negotiate from a position of choice. You want these things, but you don't need them, and that subtle difference completely changes the dynamic of every interaction. People can sense desperation, even when you think you're hiding it well. They can feel your neediness, your attachment, your fear of rejection, and whether consciously or unconsciously, they use this knowledge to their advantage. But when you genuinely don't need anything from them, when you're operating from abundance rather than scarcity, they sense that too. And it makes them more likely to offer you what you want, simply because you don't seem to need it. The fourth element of calculated indifference is learning to see people's actions rather than listening to their words. Most people are hypnotized by language, by promises, by explanations, by excuses. But the strategically minded understand that behavior is the only reliable indicator of intention. Someone can tell you they value your friendship while consistently treating you poorly. Someone can promise you opportunities while never following through. Someone can claim to have your best interests at heart while making decisions that clearly benefit only themselves. Calculated indifference protects you from this kind of manipulation by making you a student of patterns rather than a believer in promises. You watch what people do when they think no one is paying attention. You notice how they treat people who can't help them advance their agenda. You observe how they behave when they're under pressure, when they're competing for something they want, when they have to choose between their interests and yours. This observational skill allows you to see betrayals coming long before they happen. You recognize the subtle shifts in behavior that indicate someone is preparing to throw you under the bus. You notice when someone's loyalty is wavering, when their priorities are changing, when their agenda is evolving in a direction that no longer includes your benefit. And because you see these changes without emotional attachment, you can adjust your own strategy accordingly. Most people remain willfully blind to these signals because acknowledging them would be painful. They don't want to believe that their friend is using them, that their partner is losing interest, that their boss is planning to replace them. So they ignore the evidence, make excuses for the behavior, and remain vulnerable to inevitable disappointment. But calculated indifference allows you to see reality clearly, even when that reality is uncomfortable. This clarity extends to understanding the difference between allies and assets, between friends and useful connections, between genuine support and strategic cooperation. Most people confuse these categories, expecting loyalty from business relationships and assuming personal connections will always prioritize their interests. But the strategically sophisticated understand that all relationships exist on a spectrum of mutual benefit, and that spectrum can shift based on changing circumstances. The fifth aspect of calculated indifference involves mastering the art of strategic vulnerability. This might seem contradictory, given everything I've said about emotional detachment and protective silence, but hear me out. Sometimes, revealing a carefully chosen weakness or struggle can be more powerful than projecting invulnerability. The key is that this vulnerability is calculated, not accidental. It serves a specific purpose in advancing your agenda. For example, sharing a story about a past failure might make you seem more relatable and trustworthy, encouraging others to lower their guard around you. Admitting to a minor insecurity might make someone feel superior and more likely to underestimate you. Revealing a struggle that many people share might create a sense of connection that you can leverage later. The difference between this and genuine vulnerability is that you're choosing what to reveal, when to reveal it, and to whom, based on strategic considerations rather than emotional impulse. This controlled vulnerability serves another important function. It prevents others from seeing you as completely unreadable or threatening. People are suspicious of those who seem too perfect, too controlled, too mysterious. By strategically showing small glimpses of humanity, you make yourself seem more approachable while still maintaining your essential privacy and emotional independence. The art lies in revealing weaknesses that don't actually make you vulnerable to exploitation. You might share a story about being bad at cooking, which makes you seem humble and relatable but doesn't give anyone power over you. You might admit to being nervous about public speaking, which humanizes you but doesn't expose any information that could be used against you. You might confess to a minor social awkwardness that actually makes you more endearing rather than less powerful. This strategic vulnerability also serves as a form of misdirection. While people are focused on the small weakness you've revealed, they're not looking for the larger strengths you're keeping hidden. While they're feeling superior about the minor insecurity you've shared, they're not recognizing the significant advantages you possess. It's like a magician drawing your attention to one hand while the real trick happens with the other. The sixth dimension of calculated indifference involves developing what I call social chess thinking. This means you're always considering not just the immediate effects of your actions, but the second and third order consequences. You're thinking about how your current move will position you for future opportunities, how it will affect your reputation, how it will influence the way others perceive and treat you going forward. Most people operate in reactive mode, responding to whatever situation is immediately in front of them without considering the larger implications. They say yes to requests that seem harmless but establish precedents they'll regret later. They share information that seems innocent but creates vulnerabilities they don't anticipate. They make decisions based on short-term comfort that create long-term problems. But calculated indifference includes the discipline of strategic thinking, of considering multiple scenarios and potential outcomes before making moves. You ask yourself not just whether you want to do something, but whether doing it serves your larger objectives. You consider not just how something will affect you today, but how it might impact your position 6 months or 2 years from now. This long-term thinking extends to relationship management. You understand that every interaction is part of a larger pattern, that every favor you do or request you make affects the overall balance of your relationship with that person. You keep mental accounts of who owes whom, not in a petty or vindictive way, but as a realistic assessment of relationship dynamics and mutual obligations. You also understand that reputation is a strategic asset that must be carefully managed. Every time you keep a commitment, you build trust. Every time you demonstrate competence, you build credibility. Every time you handle a difficult situation with grace, you build respect. And conversely, every time you fail to follow through, every time you demonstrate incompetence, every time you handle pressure poorly, you damage your social capital. The seventh element of calculated indifference is learning to weaponize your attention. Most people give their attention away freely, without considering its value or strategic importance. They listen to everyone's problems, respond to every request for their time, and make themselves available to anyone who wants access to them. But attention is a finite resource, and like any resource, it should be allocated. Strategically, when you practice calculated indifference, you become selective about where you invest your mental and emotional energy. You understand that giving someone your full attention is a form of reward, and like any reward, it should be earned rather than given automatically. This doesn't mean you become rude or dismissive, but it does mean you become more intentional about how you engage with others. You might listen politely to someone's story without offering the emotional investment they're seeking. You might respond to requests for your time with questions about why your involvement is necessary and what benefit it provides. You might engage in small talk without revealing anything significant about yourself or your plans. You become skilled at appearing engaged while remaining essentially unavailable. This selective attention creates a powerful dynamic. People begin to compete for your focus, to work harder to earn your interest, to value your time more highly because they can't take it for granted. You become someone whose opinion matters more because it's not freely given to everyone. Your approval becomes more meaningful because it's not automatically granted. The eighth aspect of calculated indifference involves mastering emotional Aikido, the ability to redirect others' emotional energy rather than absorbing it or fighting against it. When someone tries to make you angry, you remain calm and use their anger to reveal information about their true motivations. When someone tries to make you feel guilty, you acknowledge their attempt without accepting responsibility for their emotions. When someone tries to manipulate you through fear, you assess the real risks without being paralyzed by their dramatization. This emotional redirection serves multiple purposes. It protects your own emotional equilibrium, preventing others from destabilizing you or clouding your judgment. It often frustrates manipulators, who rely on emotional reactions to maintain control over their targets. And it frequently causes people to reveal more about themselves than they intended, as they escalate their tactics when their initial attempts fail. Most people are emotional sponges, absorbing whatever energy others project onto them. If someone around them is anxious, they become anxious. If someone is angry, they either become angry in response or become fearful of the anger. If someone is depressed, they feel obligated to try to fix the situation, or they become depressed themselves. But calculated indifference includes the ability to observe others' emotions without taking ownership of them. This doesn't mean you become heartless or unsympathetic. You can acknowledge someone's pain without making it your responsibility to fix it. You can recognize someone's anger without accepting blame for causing it. You can observe someone's manipulation attempts without becoming indignant about their tactics. You become like a skilled therapist, present and engaged, but not emotionally entangled. The ninth dimension of calculated indifference is developing what I call strategic empathy. This is different from the automatic emotional empathy that most people experience. Strategic empathy means you can understand how others think and feel. You can predict their reactions and motivations, but you use this understanding to advance your own objectives rather than being controlled by their emotional states. This skill allows you to become incredibly effective at influence and persuasion because you can frame your requests in terms of what others want rather than what you need. You can anticipate objections and prepare responses. You can identify the emotional triggers that will motivate people to act in ways that benefit you. You can present yourself in whatever light will be most advantageous in any given situation. Strategic empathy also protects you from being manipulated by others' emotional displays. You can recognize when someone is performing distress to gain sympathy, when someone is feigning anger to intimidate you, when someone is pretending confusion to avoid responsibility. Because you understand the mechanics of emotional manipulation, you're less likely to fall victim to it. The final element of calculated indifference is learning to operate from what I call principled selfishness. This means you prioritize your own interests, but you do so according to a consistent set of principles that prevent you from becoming randomly destructive or needlessly cruel. You're not trying to harm others, but you're also not sacrificing your well-being for theirs unless doing so serves your larger objectives. This principled approach prevents calculated indifference from turning into sociopathy. You maintain your integrity and your long-term thinking even as you protect yourself from exploitation and manipulation. You can be ruthless in pursuing your goals while still operating according to ethical guidelines that you've consciously chosen rather than blindly inherited. Principled selfishness also means you're honest about your motivations, at least with yourself. You don't pretend that your self-interested actions are actually altruistic. You don't lie to yourself about why you're making certain choices or maintaining certain relationships. This self-honesty prevents the kind of cognitive dissonance that weakens decision-making and creates internal conflict. As you develop this habit of calculated indifference, you'll notice profound changes in how others respond to you. People will begin to treat you with more respect, even when you're not demanding it. They'll seek your approval more actively, even when you're not withholding it manipulatively. They'll work harder to maintain relationships with you, even when you're not threatening to withdraw. This happens because you've fundamentally shifted the power dynamic in your relationships. Instead of being the one who needs something from others, you become someone that others want something from. Instead of being reactive to others' moods and agendas, you become someone that others react to. Instead of being influenced by everyone around you, you become someone who influences others simply by being authentically self-contained. But remember, this transformation requires genuine internal work, not just surface-level behavior changes. You can't fake indifference any more than you can fake confidence. People have an intuitive sense for authenticity, and they'll see through attempts to manipulate them through pretended detachment. The indifference must be real, rooted in genuine self-sufficiency and outcome independence. This means you must do the work of building a life that you find genuinely fulfilling, independent of others' approval or participation. You must develop skills, interests, and sources of satisfaction that don't depend on external validation. You must create financial, emotional, and social security that allows you to walk away from situations that don't serve you. The habit of calculated indifference is not about becoming cold or cruel. It's about becoming free. Free from the desperate need for approval that makes you vulnerable to manipulation. Free from the emotional reactivity that clouds your judgment and weakens your position. Free from the attachment to specific outcomes that prevents you from seeing and seizing better opportunities. When you master this habit, you don't become less human. You become more strategically human. You can still love deeply, but you love by choice rather than compulsion. You can still care about others, but you care from a position of strength rather than neediness. You can still pursue your dreams, but you pursue them with the confidence that comes from knowing you'll be fine regardless of any specific outcome. This is the secret that separates those who control their destiny from those who are controlled by circumstances. This is the difference between those who shape their environment and those who are shaped by it. This is the habit that transforms you from someone who hopes for the best to someone who creates the best, not through force or manipulation, but through the quiet power that comes from being genuinely self-contained in a world full of people desperately seeking something outside themselves. The choice is yours. You can continue operating from need, attachment, and emotional reactivity, remaining vulnerable to anyone skilled enough to exploit these weaknesses. Or you can develop the habit of calculated indifference, becoming someone who moves through the world with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you need nothing from anyone, that you're not capable of creating for yourself.